How y'all doing? For this book review, I'm doing this right at the end of October, so it's almost Halloween, so I figured throughout the month I'd raise something that fits the theme. Last year I did this with Dracula. This time I'm going to go over Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. You know Frankenstein, I know Frankenstein, but do we really know Frankenstein, at least the book version of it? I mean, well, before I get into that, this is the second time I read this book. The first time was back in high school, but to explain that, what it is that, during high school, because there's some limited time, you had a short story or poem to read, and you could read that at completion. But when it comes to novels, teachers gave us partial bits of it for us to read and explore, except for this time around where, in the case of Frankenstein, our teacher gave us a whole study guide, several pages of it, more than usual, and the only way we could complete it is to actually read it. So at that time I was reading it, but not in the way I would normally read books. I would go page by page, read, somewhat skim and halfway through it just to find out the parts that I've read. So you end up getting to know the story, but it's not the same experience as reading it, for yourself, wanting to enjoy it for yourself. So the second time around is just that. Now, here's the thing about Frankenstein. As I said, we all know Frankenstein. But how do we know Frankenstein? It's, mostly through cultural osmosis, and usually in movies. The incarnation, when you think Frankenstein, what's the image you have? It's either of the original Universal Pictures Boris Karloff, or its derivatives. Just about, you could tell just by that image of Boris Karloff alone. You could love it or hate that movie. I don't hate it. I actually, enjoy the style of it and everything. I've only watched it once a long time ago. But because of that is how we got to know it. We know the basis of it. Mad scientist brings this creature to life and it wreaks havoc and so forth. And there's all these different ways. With the exception of one movie version I know that sticks to the book, all the others kind of go their own way. So it does this. It branches off to so many incarnations derived from Universals. When you read the book, there's a whole lot of things we're missing from this. So let's explore it. The book, like Dracula, is a epistolary novel where it's false documents. Everything you read is you're reading it in as someone else has written hand letters. In this case, they had written letters of the man named Walton, whose letters framed the story. Walton is a man on a journey to try and reach the North Pole, a very dangerous journey at that time. His ship gets stuck in the ice, and he finds first they find someone using sleds across the ice, and but they couldn't tell who it was at distance, but it was this very large proportioned being. Later they come across another guy who's isolated, and they pick him up and nurse him back, and it turns out to be Victor Frankenstein. He tells Walton his story, and Walton is writing it down to the best of his knowledge as letters to his sister, and this is the framework of the story at hand. Victor talks about his early life as a child, being raised up in a beautiful home near Geneva, Switzerland. His father, and his siblings. Later, he has a cousin live with them for a while, Elizabeth, who later becomes his love interest. And while him and his he also has a childhood friend named Clerval. He's had a nice, happy childhood, beautiful setting, wants for nothing. They were homeschooled for a while. He learns now, some of the books of what they had around. He also reads some more ancient, out of date texts. Some of them are kind of mixed with some magic or alchemical, out of date ideas. His father told him this is a waste of time, and later when he gets a little older, he goes away from home to a school where where teachers are. One teacher was really like, you wasted your time with this. But besides all that, during his schooling, Victor finds a way to bring the dead flesh back to life. So secretly he hides out in a spot and puts his creation together through stolen parts, creates a being which he hopes will be physical perfection, and he's very large, about 8 feet tall, and he finally does it. He's stretched to the point where he's exhausted all that, and find out that the creation that he did is hideous to look upon, and he tries to rest for a while, but then he's frightened when the creature slowly shambles up to him in his bed and looks upon him, but he's scared and runs off. Go back to near his school, in the room, to his room there, where his friend Clerval comes by, nurses him back to health, and and for the next 2 years he tries to forget about it. Of course, by 2 years, he gets a message from home that his youngest brother, who was only a few years old, is killed. So he goes back home, and upon investigating this, apparently his brother was killed by strangulation. There is a servant of the family who is dearly loved, but she is now pinned as the murderer because she had a piece of jewelry that was on his little brother at the time of his death. So she goes to trial. She is stressed. She is stressed to confession that she committed it, even though she did not. There's just no way. This is kind of obvious to us under the circumstances. Anybody who, strangulation would have been, could her hands actually do that? But, moving on. She is now hanged. So Victor eventually finds out that his creation did this. So after all that, the family tries to, try to put it all behind him. They go out to the mountains and explore for a while. Victor is off on his own, and the creature contacts him and takes him to a secret cave out in the mountains there. And this is where the creature, who is never given a name, mind you, the creature tells his story of what he did within the last 2 years. After finding out, he starts to observe all that he can. This is in the middle of winter where he first starts to explore. He finds out about his hunger and how he takes to feeding. He feeds off berries and roots. He finds out how to make fire. It's just trial and error. This creature is not malevolent at all. He's not evil. In fact, if anything, he wants to be accepted. And so for a while, he hides out into he tries to go to a village. They all rejected him. They beat him, so he runs off. Later, he hides out in a small little cottage where he observes this family for a while, this nice, loving family. And that's where, for a majority of 2 years, he stays in a hovel just watching them carefully. He finds out their names. He learns, he watches them read books, and he starts to learn how to read. And when he does, he starts reading, parts of Paradise Lost and a couple other things. Eventually, he finds out that there are papers in the clothing he's taken from where he first awakens, that he finds Victor's notes. He finds out about how he was created. He also understands that people find him hideous. That's why they rejected him, and he's trying to hope that in time, he can attempt to confront the people of this cottage, and to befriend him and all that. Long story short, no. They reject him immediately, so he runs off. He tries to save a girl from drowning in a lake, and only to find her father tries to shoot him. He's rejected on all course. As I'm really shorthanding this, but this takes place in several chapters. But as the creature tells his story, this is not how we think of the Frankenstein's creature at all. And that's the part I enjoyed about it, is this monster's account intelligently explaining his position of what he's after. So after telling Victor of all that and confessing to Victor Frankenstein that he's the one that murdered the kid and pinned it on her, he now makes a demand. If the world will not accept him, he demands Victor Frankenstein to create for him a female partner for him, and he will run off. He will never see him again. They'll run off in an isolated area in South America. Yes, he said that. That sounds kind of weird, but that's what he said. That way, and those two can be lived away from society and all that. Victor, hearing him, agrees. So Victor, agreeing to his terms, joins with Clerval. They travel abroad up in England and all that, but then Victor tells Clerval, "Okay, we've been traveling for a while, but I got something I want to do in private. So just leave me be. You go about and enjoy yourself, but do not bother me. I'll contact you when it happens." So now he begins his process of trying to make a partner with Frankenstein. But then, just when he's about done, he realizes, he thinks about it over. It's like, how could he bring this into the world? He thinks about how his younger brother was murdered, and how his maidservant was framed for it. And what will happen if this other creation does not accept him? or even if she does, they would have children. What kind of monstrosities? He's thinking about all this, so he destroys the next creation that the creature asked for him. And as he does so, the creature says, "Okay, now I'm going to take my revenge on you. I have been refused love. I have tried my best," and he has. And Victor is now refusing to, give him what he wants. So the creature is now going to give vengeance on him. He's going to make him regret everything about creating him. I want to be accepted by all, but you will not allow me. And now I will be the monster you assumed me to be. And so the creature does. While he's already done damage to Victor Frankenstein before this by killing his younger brother and framing the maidservant which causes her death, he does more now that Victor decides not to help him out in his cause. He kills Clerval, and Victor is under investigation as a possible murderer. And when he's dropped on that, he later goes back home. He tries to marry. Ends up trying to marry his Elizabeth, and on their wedding night, she is killed by the creature. His father ends up, dying as well, and eventually he just loses everything. The creature is holding to his promise quite well, to the point where Victor now decides to hunt him. Now, the creature, as we know, is not a lumbering, beast. He's 8 feet tall, highly dexterous, incredibly strong, very endurable to the elements. But and so it's a bit of a challenge for Victor to try and chase him down. He chases him down. He across several areas there, and eventually they go up north to where up to the Arctic, where Victor meets with Walton and his expedition to journey to the North Pole. I know I didn't give spoiler warnings at the beginning of this, but hear me out. I think this is one of those books we all know exist. Some of you who are probably watching this have already read it already, but if you haven't, I think, by shortening this up, it's a different experience to read the book itself and seeing all this and the way it's expressed and all that. Okay, you may find it slow in parts where Victor starts explaining locations and stuff like that, and he describes it as very beautiful places to visit at a time. But that's sort of the point. You want to see Victor's life as a child, of how he grew up with. You want to see what all the joys he had in traveling abroad, or his education, all that. You had to read and thoroughly how good his life is, and through his obsession and his secrecy and in his creation, it brings it all down. May not work for everyone, but I think it's important when you read this to understand it in mind, because when it crashes down, it crashes down. It may not work by today's standards, and okay, that's understandable. We're so used to so many ways for us to do that. But if you were somebody of this time reading this, it's a understandable why this was a huge seller. This creature, I definitely like his take on it. I like the fact that while the creature, is not a simpleton, he doesn't have a rotten brain. He's not a mad dog killer at the start. He really wants to be good. Seriously wants to be accepted. Wants to understand love. Wants to give love to others. But everyone rejected him because of his looks. He's a tall, hideous creature, described constantly as that. And he's not given a chance. So they assume to be a monster. So he becomes one, that they assumed him to be. And when you read about the chapters where the creature talks of Frankenstein, that I thought was the best part. And the imagery I have mentally when you say a monster sticking his you see him in the window watching Frankenstein, and he gets that snare, like yes, or I think it's just it's classic. We may think it's cliche, but it really works when you read about this. He's like, so you understand the creature's motives, you understand Victor Frankenstein's motives, not wanting to make his help, and the fact of why should I help someone else who's murdered members of a family. It's this weird going off interaction between the two. So again, a bit of a ramble here, but I think as I read this book, I definitely appreciate it so much more, and all that. But as I said before, Frankenstein is mostly known to us through cultural osmosis, through movie forms. Particularly Boris Karloff's imagery. And I don't get me wrong, I don't hate it. There's a reason why it sticks to our minds and all that. It was well done at its time. What little I've seen of Boris Karloff's acting, he's very good in other things. But because of the universal rendition of Frankenstein, everything else is derived from that point, not always from the book itself. It has to be through electricity, that brings the monster to life, even though the book never explains the process about that. Okay, that's understandable. You want to keep things a mystery. And Mary Shelley was like 18, 19 years old when she wrote this. Think about that. Very few young people, write a best-selling novel like this. I mean, come across our examples, but to stand the test of time and not just a few hit, not just a one-hit wonders or a few hit wonders. It comes and goes, and that's it. But there is, as far as movies go, as I said, they all derive from the original Universal ones. There was one in 1984 that follows the beats of the story of the original book, and that was from the 1994 Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, starring Robert De Niro as the creature and Kenneth Branagh as Victor Frankenstein. Helen Bonham Carter also plays Elizabeth. As it follows the beats, but like Bram Stoker's Dracula, that also came out in the early 90s. There's while it follows the beats, there's this weird. Thinking back on it, sorry if I can't quite explain it. There's this over the topness about it, and how actions and a bit bombastic in some areas, part where. The creature kills Elizabeth by taking out her heart, where in the original book it was done, in a sense, off screen. Victor finds her broken on their wedding bed and all that. But that is the closest one. I remember my teacher. This movie came out on video when we were already in this book. My teacher showed this to us because a student brought to her, this is the closest thing to the book, and it is, but not a perfect one. I think if you try to make this. I think it's not impossible to make this book, more or less make a more accurate version of this. But one of the things that you have to be careful is not to make it too boring. Everybody, you can have some slow beats as far as the average moviegoer goes. I don't think it's impossible. I think if someone respects it and thinks it through, we could come with a very nice rendition of this. That's could be a good definitive one for people to watch if they don't have time to read a book.
You can get the book in any form you want. It's not hard to find. Hardcover, paperback, new, used, cheap, expensive, whatever form you want it in. Mine's the abridged classic version by Pocket Books. But if I may make a suggestion, get the 2011 edition illustrated by the late great comic book artist Bernie Wrightson. His illustrations match the look and feel of similar printed art from the time period and depicts accurately the events of the story. I would argue that this art should be with the book in the same way that Gustave Doré's art is always associated with Dante's Divine Comedy and Don Quixote by Cervantes. If you want to get an illustrated hardcover, this is the one to get.
So there you go, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the classic book that was a huge hit, at its time. It's a classic in Gothic horror and of the Romance period associated with it. Again, most of us know Frankenstein through cultural osmosis through the movies. Some of you have read the book. I say read it again. Think about the creature, as he's depicted in the book, as opposed to everything he's derived from the film. I have to admit, while I can enjoy some of the film adaptations of it, I think that I definitely like the book a hell of a lot more. Again, I know it's so cliche to say that the book is better than the movie, but in this case you really have to explore why, because of how so much it deviates from that, and it's a different beast. So much of renditions of interpretations of Frankenstein is of science, exploring God's domain, and it's not unfair to reason that point, but it's not the whole thing. Stephen Jay Gould wrote an essay that you can find in Dinosaurs in a Haystack that depicting that mainly the argument is that this the supposed creature is only a monster because everyone assumes he is by his appearance. And in fact, that's a theme we see in many that's been repeated in other things outside of Frankenstein. Some of you are probably thinking of one right now. Are you familiar with Game of Thrones? Particularly Tyrion Lannister, how he's he's a dwarf who has his features are not considered eventually attractive. His father detests him for it, and it backfires. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein did it before. She may not be the first, but it is a reason why it's held as a classic today. So give it a go. If you've read it before, read it again. If you haven't read the book and you know much about it, give it a chance. It's not it's not that big. You might find a couple slow parts, but when it gets good for the creature's interaction with Victor Frankenstein, that's why I think it shines. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.